Ancient ideas still steer our modern world in quiet, powerful ways. How did a single philosophy, Stoicism, travel across three great empires and permanently reshape their cultures? Marcus Aurelius once wrote that all things are intertwined, woven together like a single piece of thread. By the end of this journey, you will understand how a set of ideas born in an Athenian colonnade came to influence Roman law, inspire modern psychology, and forge a resilient mindset that still endures. We will trace Stoicism's path from Greece to Rome and far beyond, following the key figures who carried its transformative wisdom. What does it mean for a way of thinking to truly conquer the world? Athens in the late 4th century was a city buzzing with intellectual energy, a marketplace of ideas where citizens debated the deepest questions of life. It was here, in the bustling heart of the Agora, that a merchant named Zeno of Citium suffered a shipwreck that would change the course of Western thought. Losing everything, he wandered into a bookshop, encountered the works of Socrates, and found a new purpose. He began teaching philosophy not in a private academy, but under the public colonnade known as the Stoa Poikile, the painted porch. This simple choice of location was revolutionary. Philosophy was no longer confined to the privileged few. It was now out in the open, accessible to any merchant, soldier, or slave who stopped to listen. Zeno's core message was as sturdy and practical as the colonnade itself. He taught that the goal of life is to live in agreement with nature. But what does that truly mean? It means recognizing that some things are within our control, like our judgments and our actions, while everything else, from our reputation to our health, is not. From this flowed a radical idea that virtue, your moral character, is the only true good. Wealth, fame, and pleasure are merely preferred or dispreferred. They are indifferent to a life well lived. A good person can be happy in poverty, while a wicked one is miserable even as an emperor. This was a philosophy built for the real world, a mental toolkit for navigating the chaos of everyday life with resilience and inner peace. By planting his school in a public space, Zeno ensured that Stoicism was never an ivory tower pursuit. It was a philosophy born on the street, designed for the people, and that very quality would become the engine for its incredible journey across empires. Alexander's conquest shattered the old world, stitching together a vast new tapestry of cultures from Greece to India. This was the Hellenistic age, an era of unprecedented fusion where ideas like spices and silks flowed freely along bustling trade routes. It was within this great cultural mixing bowl that Stoicism found its first vehicle for global travel. The philosophy's central concept, the logos, was its perfect passport. The logos was understood as the divine reason, a rational principle that orders the entire cosmos. It was not a god of a specific mountain or city, but a universal force present in everything and everyone. This was a revolutionary idea. A quote from the Stoic teacher Cleans beautifully captures this. He wrote, "Lead me, O Zeus, and thou, O Destiny, to whatever post you have assigned me." For this universal spirit made the entire world a single, shared city. Because the logos was everywhere, Stoic wisdom could belong to anyone, anywhere. A merchant in Alexandria, a scholar in Babylon, or a bureaucrat in Pergamon could all access the same rational principle within themselves. This universalism made the philosophy incredibly adaptable. It did not require you to abandon your local gods or customs. Instead, it offered a new layer of understanding, a way to see your place within a vast, interconnected cosmos. The Stoic emphasis on personal virtue and inner resilience resonated deeply with people living in turbulent, changing times. It provided a stable inner compass when the external world was in constant flux. This powerful combination of a cosmopolitan worldview and practical mental tools allowed Stoicism to be exported, translated, and adopted, setting the stage for its most consequential journey yet into the heart of an empire being built on law and order. Rome was a society built on action, not abstract thought. While the Greeks debated the finer points of the cosmos in their colonnades, the Roman elite saw in Stoicism something far more valuable, a practical operating system for a life of duty and service. They stripped the philosophy of its most complex Greek theorizing and seized upon its core as a mental discipline for leadership. The result was a profound cultural shift, turning a philosophy of the mind into a code of conduct for the Republic. For a Roman, virtue was not a private matter. It was demonstrated through action in the forum, on the battlefield, and in the administration of a vast empire. The Stoic distinction between what is within our control and what is not became a vital tool for senators and generals facing immense pressure and unpredictable fortunes. It provided the inner resilience to make clear-headed decisions in the chaos of politics and war. No one embodied this Roman Stoic ideal more powerfully than Cato the Younger. He was a living monument to the philosophy, a man whose personal conduct became a political statement. In an era of escalating corruption and the rise of dictators like Julius Caesar, Cato used his Stoic principles as a shield against tyranny. His unwavering commitment to justice and the old republic, his famous austerity, and his refusal to compromise his integrity even in the face of certain defeat, made him a legend. To his supporters, he was the last virtuous Roman. To his enemies, he was an infuriatingly stubborn obstacle. Cato demonstrated that Stoic virtue was not passive acceptance, but could be the very foundation of active, principled opposition. He showed how inner discipline could fuel public courage. This fusion of Greek wisdom and Roman pragmatism transformed Stoicism from a school of thought into a vital force, one that would soon find its ultimate expression not in a defiant senator, but in the most powerful man in the world. Yet the ultimate test of Stoicism would not be on the battlefield, but in the gilded halls of absolute power. Lucius Annaeus Seneca, a man of letters born in a distant province, became the Stoic voice whispering directly into the ear of an emperor. As the tutor and chief advisor to Nero, Seneca was the ultimate insider, a philosopher placed at the very epicenter of Roman power. His life presents a fascinating puzzle, a study in profound tension. How could a man who preached the virtues of a simple life and inner peace amass one of the largest personal fortunes in the empire? He wrote extensively about the dangers of wealth and the importance of tranquility, all while navigating the treacherous, blood-soaked politics of the imperial court. This very contradiction, however, is what made his work so powerful and enduring. He was not a sage on a mountaintop, but a man in the arena, and his writings became a practical survival guide for the elite. In his essay on the shortness of life, Seneca delivers a stunningly modern rebuke to the busy Roman aristocrat. He argues that life is not short, we simply waste most of it. We are stretched thin by endless social obligations, pointless pursuits, and anxiety about the future. We act as if life is a resource that will never run out, when in truth, it is leaking away every day. His solution was not to retreat from public life, but to reclaim your time with fierce intentionality. For a senator whose days were filled with duties and potential dangers, this was a call to mental clarity. His other great work, On Tranquility of Mind, reads like a manual for maintaining your sanity in a world of chaos. He offers practical steps like choosing your friends wisely and not being shaken by slander, advice that was literally a matter of life and death in Nero's Rome. Through Seneca, Stoicism was no longer just a philosophy for senators like Cato. It became the operating system for anyone trying to live a meaningful life within a complex and often corrupt system. He embedded Stoic principles into the heart of Roman literature and governance, proving that inner freedom could be cultivated even from within a gilded cage. Stoicism's power lies in its radical inclusivity. It spoke with equal clarity to a man in chains and the man who commanded legions. At one end of the Roman world was Epictetus, born a slave, his body owned by another. At the other was Marcus Aurelius, emperor of the known world, his every word a law. Yet they both drew strength from the exact same philosophy, proving its core message was not about your station in life, but your relationship to it. Epictetus, having known the ultimate lack of external freedom, focused his teachings with laser precision on the one thing no master could ever take, the inner citadel of the mind. He taught that we are not disturbed by events, but by the judgments we attach to them. A master might chain your body, but only you could enslave your mind with fear or desire. His famous handbook, the Enchiridion, is a practical guide to mental freedom. He asks his students to apply a simple test to every situation. Is this within my control, or is it not? Your reputation is not in your control. Your property is not. Your body will eventually fail you, and that too is outside your complete command. The only thing truly yours is your faculty of choice, your ability to use reason to assent or dissent to the impressions that flood your mind. This is the ultimate liberation. It means a person in the direst circumstances can still choose courage, can still choose dignity, can still find a way to be free. Marcus Aurelius, writing in his private journal known as the Meditations, faced the opposite challenge. He had too much external power, not too little. His writings are not a public teaching like Epictetus, but a nightly dialogue with himself, a constant effort to use Stoic principles to avoid the corruptions of absolute authority. While Epictetus focused on securing inner freedom from external constraints, Marcus wrestled with the burden of wielding that external power justly. He constantly reminds himself that the purple robe is just a sheep's hair dyed in the blood of a shellfish. He is an emperor, but he is also a man, destined for the same dust as the lowest slave. His duty, therefore, is not to indulge in the privileges of his station, but to serve the common good, to act with justice, and to accept the follies of others with patience. He writes, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." It is the same fundamental lesson Epictetus taught, but applied from a throne. Here lies the profound truth their lives demonstrate. Stoicism provided a complete framework for human dignity, regardless of circumstance. For the slave, it was a philosophy of internal emancipation. For the emperor, it was a philosophy of responsible power. Both men were practicing the same mental discipline, one to endure a life of limitation, the other to manage a life of limitless influence. They prove that the quality of your character is not determined by what happens to you or what you possess, but by how you choose to meet your fate. This universal adaptability ensured the philosophy's survival long after their world crumbled into history. The private journal of Marcus Aurelius was never meant for our eyes. He titled his thoughts simply to himself, a raw and unpolished record of a man grappling with the immense weight of ruling the world. This was not a philosophical treatise for public acclaim, but a personal handbook for self-governance, written during long military campaigns on the harsh northern frontier. In the quiet of his tent, far from the adulation of Rome, the emperor engaged in a nightly dialogue with his own soul. He used the principles of Stoicism as a whetstone, constantly sharpening his character against the grind of absolute power. His reflections reveal a leader who understood that to govern an empire, he first had to master the empire within his own mind. One of his most persistent challenges was dealing with difficult people. He writes of encountering annoying, ungrateful, and even treacherous individuals, a daily reality for any leader. Instead of giving in to anger or frustration, his Stoic training provided a different lens. He reminds himself that these people act out of ignorance, believing their actions are correct. To be angry with them is as pointless as being angry with a fig tree for producing figs. It is their nature to act as they do, and his own nature is to respond with patience and justice. This was not passive acceptance, but a strategic reframing that allowed him to engage with conflicts clearly, without being clouded by destructive emotion. It was a philosophy for maintaining composure in the chaos of command. Alongside this, his deep meditation on accepting fate shaped his entire approach to governance. He constantly returns to the image of the universe as a single living organism, where every event, even a plague or a military defeat, is part of a larger, rational whole. His duty was not to curse his circumstances, but to play his assigned part with excellence. He saw himself as a limb of that greater body, writing that what does not benefit the hive does not benefit the bee. This cosmic perspective translated into a profound sense of service. He viewed his imperial authority not as a privilege for personal glory, but as a responsibility to the common good. By accepting the things he could not change, from natural disasters to the actions of others, he freed his energy to focus relentlessly on what he could control: his own judgments, his actions, and his commitment to duty. Through this private practice, Marcus Aurelius demonstrated that the most effective leadership emerges from a disciplined inner life. His meditations became a model for wielding power with wisdom and resilience, proving that a ruler's first and most important conquest is over himself. A Roman legionary stationed on the windswept border of Hadrian's Wall faced more than just enemy tribes. He confronted endless damp, the gnawing ache of hunger, and the ever-present shadow of a violent death far from home. In this world of enforced hardship, Stoicism did not offer empty comfort. It provided a battle-tested mental framework for survival. The philosophy's core distinction between what is within your control and what is not was not an abstract debate for these soldiers. It was a daily practice. A soldier could not control the weather, the orders from his centurion, or the flight of an enemy arrow, but he could absolutely control his discipline, his courage in the face of fear, and his loyalty to the man standing next to him. This focus on internal virtue over external circumstance became the bedrock of military morale across the vast empire. Enduring discomfort was not merely expected, it was reframed as an opportunity to strengthen one's character. A long march in heavy armor was not just suffering, it was a test of endurance that a disciplined mind could embrace. The bitter cold of a German winter was a chance to prove one's self-reliance. This stoic resilience transformed random hardship into a purposeful trial. It taught the soldier that while he might not choose his situation, he always chose his response. This mindset was crucial for maintaining order and effectiveness in a fighting force spread across 3 continents. A legion that could endure setback without breaking, that could accept death as a part of a natural order rather than a terrifying injustice, was a legion that could hold the line. The philosophy of the painted porch had found its most practical application in the mud of the frontier, forging not just soldiers, but soldier philosophers who understood that true victory began with mastering the world within. This belief in a universal logos did more than comfort soldiers and guide emperors. It began to quietly reshape the very bedrock of Roman society, its legal system. The old Roman law, the Law of the 12 Tables, was a rigid code applying only to Roman citizens. A Greek merchant or an Egyptian sailor in the city had no standing under its provisions. But the Stoic idea of a single, divine reason present in every human being introduced a revolutionary legal concept, the idea of a natural law. Philosophers and jurists began to argue that above the written laws of any single state, there existed a higher law, a universal standard of justice rooted in nature itself. This natural law was not decreed by a senate or an emperor. It was discovered through human reason, a faculty granted to all people by the shared logos. This was a philosophical earthquake. If every person, whether Roman citizen, foreigner, or even slave, possessed this spark of reason, then they all shared a fundamental dignity and certain inherent rights simply by virtue of being human. This thinking directly challenged the old legal order. A brilliant jurist named Gaius, writing in the 2nd century, formalized this shift. He proposed that the entire body of law should be divided into two parts, the law of individual nations and the law of all humanity, which he called the law of nations or jus gentium. This law of nations was not based on Roman tradition, but on what reason dictated was fair and just for all people everywhere. It was, in essence, the practical application of natural law to international disputes and the treatment of non-citizens. Think of a contract dispute between a Roman banker and a Phoenician trader. Under the old system, the Phoenician might have no recourse, but under the influence of Stoic thought, jurists argued that basic principles like the need to keep one's promises and to act in good faith were universal rational principles. They applied to everyone, and thus the foreign merchant deserved a fair hearing. This was the Stoic legacy in action. The abstract idea of a cosmic city of reason was slowly, painstakingly, being written into legal precedent. It planted the seed for concepts we now take for granted, that certain rights are inalienable and that justice should be blind to nationality or status. How would this resilient philosophy, now embedded in the heart of Western law, survive the total collapse of the empire that nurtured it? The Roman Empire did not fall quietly, but the philosophy it had nurtured refused to die with its legions and laws. As the old order crumbled, a new spiritual force was rising, one that would absorb the Stoic legacy and carry it forward in a radically different form. The relationship between Stoicism and early Christianity was complex, a dance of both deep resonance and fundamental disagreement. On one hand, the early church fathers saw in pagan philosophy a dangerous rival. Yet on the other, they recognized a powerful ally in its ethical framework. They began a great project of intellectual synthesis, carefully weaving threads of Stoic thought into the fabric of Christian doctrine. A figure like St. Augustine, before his famous conversion, was deeply steeped in the philosophy of his time. He admired the Stoic ideal of mastering destructive passions, what they called apatheia, the state of being free from unhealthy emotions. This pursuit of inner tranquility aligned perfectly with the Christian struggle against sinful desires. The Stoic emphasis on self-control, on governing one's anger, lust, and greed, was readily adopted as a vital component of the Christian path to holiness. It provided a practical discipline for the soul. The synthesis went even deeper into the very concept of law. Remember the Stoic idea of a universal logos, a rational principle governing the cosmos. For Christian thinkers, this was a stunning prefiguration of their own belief in a divine creator. They reinterpreted the logos not as an impersonal force, but as the Word of God, the active reason through which all things were made. This allowed them to embrace the Stoic concept of natural law with breathtaking elegance. They argued that God had written his moral law not just on stone tablets, but into the very fabric of creation and the human conscience. What we could discover through reason, as the Stoics taught, was now also revealed as God's eternal will. This created a powerful dual foundation for ethics. A Christian could point to Scripture, but also to the innate sense of right and wrong within every person, a universal moral compass implanted by the Creator. The shared focus on virtue was undeniable. The four cardinal virtues of Stoicism, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance, were seamlessly integrated as the essential pillars of a Christian life. Yet for all this synthesis, the theological divergences were profound and unbridgeable. The Stoic sage sought self-sufficiency through reason, a calm acceptance of a predetermined fate. The Christian saint sought salvation through divine grace, a transformative relationship with a personal God. Where the Stoic saw virtue as its own reward, the Christian saw it as a response to God's love and a path to eternal life. This great fusion of Greek reason and Christian revelation ensured that Stoic practices would not be lost. They were baptized, translated, and entrusted to a new institution that would preserve knowledge through the coming Dark Ages, the monastic scriptorium. While the Western Roman Empire dissolved into a patchwork of kingdoms, 1,000 miles to the east a second Rome endured. Constantinople stood as a magnificent fortress of marble and gold, its walls defying barbarian armies and its libraries guarding the ancient world's knowledge. In these vast imperial archives and bustling scriptoriums, Byzantine monks and scholars performed a quiet, monumental task, meticulously copying the crumbling papyrus scrolls of Greek philosophy onto durable parchment. They were not merely preserving texts, they were actively weaving Stoic principles into the very fabric of Eastern Orthodox theology and Byzantine statecraft. A key figure in this great synthesis was the Emperor Justinian the Great. His monumental legal code, the Corpus Juris Civilis, was a direct descendant of the Roman jurists influenced by Stoic natural law. He sought to create a single, rational legal system for his empire, one based on universal principles of justice that transcended local custom, an idea with deep Stoic roots. But the integration went far beyond law. Byzantine theologians engaged in a profound dialogue with Stoic concepts, particularly the Logos. They saw the impersonal cosmic reason of the Stoics as a profound, if incomplete, glimpse of the Christian God. This allowed them to adopt the Stoic language of inner discipline and self-mastery as a vital path to spiritual purification. The ideal Byzantine statesman was expected to embody a Christianized form of the Stoic sage, ruling with apatheia, a calm detachment from personal passion, in order to administer justice with divine impartiality. For centuries, this Eastern empire acted as a living reservoir, safeguarding the intellectual treasures of antiquity. When political and economic turmoil finally pushed Greek scholars westward, they carried these preserved Stoic manuscripts with them, sparking a fire that had been carefully banked for a millennium, a fire that would help ignite the European Renaissance and change the world once more. As the Byzantine libraries preserved the past, a new intellectual dawn was breaking further east. In the vibrant capitals of the Abbasid Caliphate, from Baghdad to Cordoba, a massive and deliberate project of translation was underway. Caliphs and wealthy patrons established the House of Wisdom, a legendary academy where teams of scholars were paid to translate the entire known world's knowledge into Arabic. The works of Plato, Aristotle, and the Greek Stoics were sought out, purchased, and meticulously rendered from Greek and Syriac into a new language of science and philosophy. This was not an act of mere collection, but of active intellectual fusion. Muslim philosophers did not simply copy these texts, they engaged with them, debated them, and wove their most compelling ideas into the rich tapestry of Islamic thought. A pioneering figure like Al-Kindi, often called the first Arab philosopher, championed the pursuit of knowledge from any source, believing that truth belonged to all humanity. He and those who followed saw in Greek logic a powerful tool for clarifying theological arguments and understanding the natural world. The Stoic concept of the logos, that universal divine reason, resonated deeply with Islamic conceptions of a single, all-powerful God whose wisdom was manifest in an orderly, rational cosmos. This engagement went beyond abstract theory. The Stoic emphasis on ethics, on mastering the self and cultivating virtues like courage and justice, found a natural home within the Islamic spiritual tradition's own focus on moral purification and inner struggle. The great philosopher and physician Avicenna built entire philosophical systems that integrated this Hellenistic inheritance, using its logical frameworks to explore the nature of the soul, the mind, and existence itself. Through this creative synthesis, the works of the Stoics, which might have been lost forever in the chaos of Europe's dark ages, were not only saved but were given new life. They were studied, commented upon, and advanced within a thriving civilization that stretched from the borders of India to the Iberian Peninsula. This Islamic vector became a crucial bridge in time, ensuring that when Europe finally reawakened to its own classical heritage, the Stoic legacy was waiting, preserved and enriched by the scholars of the Golden Age. A monk kneeling in the cold of his stone cell was engaged in a form of training that would have felt deeply familiar to Epictetus. He had renounced property, family, and personal will, not for philosophical apatheia, but for the love of God. Yet the tools he used to sculpt his soul were remarkably Stoic in their design. The monastic vow of poverty was a radical application of the Stoic doctrine of indifference to external goods. Just as a Stoic sage would see wealth as a preferred indifferent, neither good nor bad in itself, the monk voluntarily shed all worldly possessions to prove that his happiness and worth were found not in what he owned, but in who he was before the divine. This was not a rejection of the world out of hatred, but a disciplined exercise in focusing the soul on what it deemed the only true good, a relationship with God. Obedience to an abbot mirrored the Stoic practice of accepting fate. A monk could not control his assigned tasks, the harshness of a superior, or the privations of monastic life. His spiritual training was to surrender his own will, to see the hand of God in every command and every hardship, and to respond not with complaint but with humble acceptance. This was the Christian reframing of the Stoic maxim to willingly follow the path that fate has assigned. Perhaps the most powerful parallel was the practice of mindfulness of death, known as memento mori. Stoics like Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about meditating on their own mortality to instill urgency and gratitude into each day. In the monastery, this became a central spiritual discipline. Skulls sat on desks in the scriptorium, monks slept in coffins, and the constant reminder that life was fleeting served to sharpen focus on eternal salvation. It was a tool to strip away trivial worries and sinful attachments, a direct echo of the Stoic use of mortality to highlight life's true priorities. Within the silent, ordered rhythm of the monastery, the ancient mental exercises of the painted porch were reborn as instruments of grace, ensuring that the discipline of the inner citadel would be practiced and preserved for 1,000 years. A forgotten manuscript arrives in a Venetian port carried by a scholar fleeing the crumbling walls of Constantinople. Its pages, copied by Byzantine monks centuries earlier, contain the complete works of a Roman philosopher. This was not a rare event, but part of a great tide of knowledge washing over a Europe starved for its own past. The rediscovery of Stoic texts, particularly the personal letters of Seneca and the practical handbook of Epictetus, struck the intellectuals of the Renaissance with the force of a revelation. After a millennium where learning was largely confined to monastery walls, Here was a philosophy that spoke directly to the individual, celebrating human reason and the potential for a virtuous life in the here and now. This was the fuel for a new wave of humanist thought. The humanists were not rejecting religion, but they were passionately arguing for the value of human experience, for the study of classical literature, and for the application of ancient wisdom to contemporary civic life. And in Stoicism, they found a powerful ally. It provided a robust ethical framework for the active citizen, the artist, the statesman, and the merchant, all navigating a world that was suddenly expanding in every direction. No one embodied this rediscovery more than Francesco Petrarca, known to us as Petrarch. He was a man torn between the spiritual aspirations of the medieval world and the emerging confidence of the new age. In his private letters, he confesses to a profound intellectual struggle, a deep dissatisfaction with the abstract debates of the scholastics. He yearned for a philosophy that could speak to the heart, that could guide a person through the tumult of ambition, love, and loss. He found his answer in a collection of Cicero's works, which led him directly to the Stoics. For Petrarch, Stoicism was not a dusty relic, it was a living conversation. He wrote letters to long-dead authors like Seneca, treating them as mentors and friends. He saw in their writings a model for personal integrity that was entirely independent of one's social station or political fortune. This was a radical idea. It suggested that a person's worth was not defined by their noble blood or their proximity to the church, but by the strength of their character. Petrarch championed the idea that the study of these ancient texts was essential for cultivating civic virtue. He argued that to be a good citizen, to contribute meaningfully to the flourishing of the city-state, one first had to master oneself. The Stoic exercises of examining one's judgments, controlling one's passions, and focusing on what is within one's control became, for the humanists, the foundation of an educated and responsible life. Through his passionate advocacy, Petrarch repopularized Stoicism among European intellectuals, transforming it from a preserved artifact into a vital tool for building a new world. This revived philosophy now faced its greatest challenge, surviving the violent schisms of a continent tearing itself apart over matters of faith. Europe was tearing itself to pieces. The 16th century was a charnel house of rival armies marching under competing crosses, burning towns and breaking bodies in the name of divine truth. In this maelstrom of doctrinal certainty and human suffering, the old medieval order lay in ruins and a terrifying question emerged. How could any society function when its very foundation, a shared faith, had shattered? From this crisis, a new political reality was being forged, the modern state, a sovereign entity that demanded loyalty above sect. And it was a quiet, meticulous scholar, Justus Lipsius, who realized that this new Leviathan needed a new soul, a philosophy of governance. He found it by returning to the Stoics, but he deliberately reshaped their teachings for a world on fire. He called his creation Neostoicism, and its central pillar was constancy. For Lipsius, constancy was not passive endurance. It was the unwavering fortitude of a public official standing firm in his duty while the storms of religious fanaticism raged around him. It was the inner resilience to administer justice and maintain order, even when the world seemed to have gone mad. This was a Stoicism stripped of its more complex Greek physics and tailored for the council chambers and courts of emerging nations like France and the Netherlands. Lipsius argued that the true enemy of public order was not any one faith, but the passions, the uncontrollable emotions of fear, hatred, and zealotry that led to massacre and civil war. A neo-Stoic statesman was therefore obligated to master his own internal chaos first. By achieving apatheia, that Stoic calmness of soul, He could see through the fog of propaganda and make decisions based on pragmatic reason, not sectarian fury. His primary duty was to the stability and security of the state itself, which he saw as the only bulwark against total societal collapse. In his immensely influential work on constancy, Lipsius used a simple, powerful analogy. He compared the wise statesman to a rock in the sea, lashed by waves but unmoving, while the foolish man was like a drifting reed, tossed and broken by every new current of opinion or outrage. This mental discipline provided a secular ethics for a fractured age. A Catholic official in a region with a growing Protestant population, or vice versa, could no longer rely solely on the dictates of his church for political guidance. He needed a higher principle, a reason-based virtue that prioritized the common peace over theological victory. Lipsius supplied that framework. He taught that the good official must practice prudence, weighing actions based on their likely outcomes for public order. He must embody discipline, enforcing laws with impartial firmness. This was how Stoicism, the philosophy of the inner citadel, became the operating system for the early modern bureaucrat, proving once again its breathtaking ability to evolve and meet the most urgent needs of its time. The intellectual fires of the Enlightenment were not kindled in a vacuum. When thinkers like Spinoza and Kant championed reason as the supreme human faculty, they were walking a path first cleared by the Stoics. That ancient idea of a universal logos, a rational principle governing the cosmos, was reborn in the 18th century as natural law. This was not a law written in legal codes, but one inscribed in the very fabric of the universe and accessible to every rational mind. It meant that ethical truths were not handed down by kings or clerics, but could be discovered by any person who dared to think clearly. This was a revolutionary shift in authority, from institutions to the individual conscience. The Stoic concept of cosmopolitanism underwent a similar transformation. The old idea of being a citizen of the world was no longer just a philosophical ideal, it became a political one. It implied that all people, by virtue of their shared capacity for reason, possessed inherent rights and a fundamental dignity that transcended the borders of any single nation. You can hear this Stoic echo clearly in the words of the American founding fathers. When Thomas Jefferson wrote in the Declaration of Independence that all men are created equal and endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, he was articulating a principle of Stoic natural law. These rights were not granted by a government, they were recognized by it. They were inherent to human nature itself, a birthright of rational beings. This was the ultimate application of the Stoic belief in a common humanity. The legal and political systems they designed were attempts to build a framework where this universal reason could flourish, where laws would reflect the higher principles of justice discoverable by all. Even Immanuel Kant's famous categorical imperative, the command to act only according to principles that could become a universal law, is a direct philosophical descendant of the Stoic worldview. It asks the individual to use their own reason to test their actions against a cosmopolitan standard, considering the entire human community as the context for their choices. The Enlightenment's great declarations of human rights were, in essence, the Stoic vision of a global city of reason finally being written into the founding documents of modern nations. A new nation demanded a new kind of character, one forged in the hard realities of the frontier and the uncertain birth of a republic. The same Stoic principles that guided a Roman emperor proved just as vital for an American farmer or statesman. In the quiet of their studies, figures like George Washington and Thomas Jefferson turned to the ancient texts for a modern purpose. Washington, often portrayed as a man of unwavering composure, modeled his famous self-control on the Stoic ideal of mastering one's passions. He understood that to lead a fragile union, he first had to govern the turmoil within himself. His ability to accept setbacks during the Long War, to endure the brutal winter at Valley Forge without public despair, was a practical display of Stoic resilience. He was not a man immune to feeling, but one who had trained his judgment to act with reason even in the grip of fear or frustration. For the plantation owner Thomas Jefferson, Stoicism offered a different kind of foundation. His declaration that all men are created equal is a political statement rooted in a philosophical truth, the Stoic belief in a universal human reason. He owned a well-worn copy of the works of Epictetus, and in his own writings he echoed the Stoic focus on inner freedom and the pursuit of virtue as the highest good. This philosophy provided an intellectual backbone for the radical idea that government's power comes from the consent of the governed, from the rational faculty of every individual. But the influence did not stop with the educated elite. The core Stoic tenets of self-reliance, frugality, and accepting one's lot became the unofficial creed of the frontier. A pioneer family facing drought, disease, and isolation did not need a formal education in philosophy to understand the distinction between what they could and could not control. They could not command the weather or the price of their crops, but they could absolutely control their own industry, their courage, and their commitment to their community. This mindset transformed hardship from a curse into a test of character, a necessary trial in the building of a new life. The American project, with its emphasis on individual liberty and personal responsibility, found a perfect partner in this ancient discipline. It was a philosophy for people who had to depend on themselves, a mental toolkit for creating order out of wilderness and forging a nation from a collection of states. The stiff upper lip was more than just a phrase, it was the very architecture of the Victorian soul. In the sprawling mansions of the British elite and the dusty outposts of a global empire, a specific code of conduct reigned supreme, one of unshakable emotional restraint and unwavering duty. This cultural ideal, which would define an era, found its philosophical backbone in the ancient principles of Stoicism, deliberately instilled in the young men destined to rule. The breeding ground for this character was the British public school. Places like Eton and Harrow were not merely academies, they were factories for forging imperial administrators. Here, boys from privileged backgrounds were subjected to a regime of Spartan living, cold showers, and rigorous competition, all designed to teach them to endure hardship without complaint. The goal was to build a resilient character, one that could suppress personal feeling in service to a larger cause. A young man who could face a cricket defeat or a brutal hazing with equal composure was being trained for a future posting on the northwest frontier of India, where panic or despair could mean the loss of a province. This was Stoicism stripped of its Greek metaphysics and repackaged as a moral curriculum for empire. The core Stoic distinction between what you can and cannot control was drilled into these students as a simple command: do your duty and master your emotions. The headmaster was a substitute for the Stoic teacher, the playing field a training ground for the battlefield, and the schoolhouse a microcosm of the world they were expected to govern. This cultivated indifference to discomfort was not meant to produce unfeeling robots, but reliable instruments of governance. A district officer alone in a remote region, facing a famine or a local uprising, could not afford to be swayed by fear or personal sympathy. His duty was to the Queen and the smooth functioning of the empire, a duty that required him to make clear-headed, often ruthless decisions. The famous phrase, "keep calm and carry on," is the ultimate expression of this Victorian Stoicism. It is a command to regulate the internal world so that the external world of order and control may be maintained. The emotional restraint of the gentleman in his London club was the same psychological tool used by the colonial officer maintaining a facade of invulnerability before thousands of subjects. This cultural adoption demonstrates Stoicism's incredible plasticity, how a philosophy born in an Athenian colonnade could be channeled into sustaining the very machinery of a modern empire, proving once again that the governance of a vast domain begins with the governance of the self. That same ancient insight, forged in the slave's quarters and the emperor's tent, would find its ultimate validation in the modern therapist's office. The journey from the Stoa poikile to contemporary mental health treatment is not a vague parallel, but a direct historical line. In the mid-20th century, a psychologist named Albert Ellis grew frustrated with the slow, meandering processes of Freudian psychoanalysis. He believed there had to be a more direct way to relieve human suffering, and he found his answer by looking backward to the works of Epictetus. Ellis was struck by one statement in particular: "We are disturbed not by things, but by the views which we take of them." He realized this was not just philosophy, it was a precise description of a psychological mechanism. Ellis built his rational emotive behavior therapy on this exact foundation, arguing that our emotional consequences are not caused by activating events themselves, but by our irrational beliefs about those events. Shortly after, another pioneer, Aaron Beck, made a similar discovery while treating patients for depression. He noticed they were trapped in a cycle of negative automatic thoughts, distorted judgments about themselves and the world. Beck saw that by teaching patients to identify and challenge these thoughts, he could break the cycle of despair. He called this cognitive behavioral therapy, and its core principle is pure Stoicism. The foundational ABC model used in CBT is a direct echo of the ancient teaching. A is the activating event, the thing that happens. B is your belief, your judgment about that event. C is the emotional consequence. Most people live as if A directly causes C, that a critical comment from a boss directly creates feelings of worthlessness. But Stoicism and CBT both insist the real culprit is B, the silent, often unconscious belief you hold, such as "I must be perfect to be valued." The entire therapeutic process is a structured way to do what Marcus Aurelius did in his private journal, to examine your impressions, to question their validity, and to choose a more rational, less catastrophic judgment. This is why CBT is so effective for anxiety and depression. It is a practical, teachable system for applying the Stoic discipline of assent. It gives people the tools to become the gatekeeper of their own mind, to stop destructive thoughts at the door before they can lay siege to their peace. The philosophy that once guided legions and built empires is now a standard tool for helping individuals reclaim their inner world, proving that the most enduring conquest is the one we make over our own thinking. So what can a Roman emperor possibly teach a modern chief executive officer? The very principles that guided Marcus Aurelius through plague and war are now being quietly deployed in the world's most competitive boardrooms. Modern leadership development has turned to Stoicism not as a historical curiosity, but as a practical operating system for navigating the relentless pressures of the corporate world. The core Stoic distinction between what is within our control and what is not has become a fundamental tenet of effective management. A leader cannot control a surprise market crash, a disruptive new competitor, or a global supply chain breakdown. But she can absolutely control her response, her team's strategy, and the clarity of her communication under duress. This mental framing is a powerful antidote to the anxiety and burnout that plague high-stakes environments. It transforms chaotic situations into a series of manageable choices, focusing energy exclusively on the actionable. This philosophy also builds profound resilience. A project failure is not a personal indictment, but an external event to be analyzed and learned from. A critical news article is not a reason for despair, but a piece of information to be assessed with calm detachment. Leaders trained in this mindset stop reacting emotionally to every setback and start responding strategically. They learn to embody the Stoic virtue of courage, not as an absence of fear, but as the ability to act wisely despite it. Furthermore, this ancient framework provides a sturdy compass for ethical decision-making when the bottom line creates conflicting pressures. The Stoic emphasis on justice and serving the common good challenges a leader to ask not just what is profitable, but what is right for employees, customers, and the broader community. It encourages long-term thinking over short-term gains, building a legacy of trust rather than a quarterly report. This is not about suppressing emotion, but about harnessing reason to lead with greater integrity, resilience, and focus. The modern CEO and the ancient philosopher king are ultimately wrestling with the same fundamental challenge: how to wield influence wisely and maintain your inner compass when the entire world is watching. Our digital world operates on a currency of distraction. Every notification is a tiny demand for your attention, every news cycle a fresh wave of outrage, and every social feed a curated highlight reel designed to provoke envy or anxiety. This constant barrage throws our internal world into chaos, making it feel impossible to find a moment of quiet focus. Yet this is precisely where the ancient discipline of Stoicism finds its most urgent modern application. The very practices that helped a Roman soldier endure the frontier can help us navigate the psychological battlefield of the information age. It begins with a simple but profound shift, recognizing that while you cannot control the digital storm around you, you can absolutely control your own attention and your judgments. This is the practice of digital mindfulness. Before clicking a link or diving into a comment section, ask the Stoic question: is this within my control? The anger of a stranger online is not. The viral misinformation is not. But your decision to engage with it, to let it occupy valuable real estate in your mind that is entirely yours to command. This leads naturally to a concept of digital minimalism, a conscious pruning of your online inputs. It is not about rejecting technology, but about intentionally selecting the tools and content that serve your growth and well-being, while ruthlessly cutting away those that only provoke empty agitation. One of the most powerful Stoic exercises for this era is the view from above. When you feel yourself getting swept into an online drama, pause for a moment. Pull your mental camera far back. See the person typing angry words in a small room, yourself reading them in another. See your city, your country, the entire planet spinning in the vast silence of space. From this cosmic perspective, how significant is that single inflammatory post? This meditation does not make the issue unimportant, but it restores a sense of proportion, draining the emotional charge and allowing you to respond, if a response is even needed, from a place of calm reason rather than reactive passion. It is the ultimate tool for decluttering a mind overstuffed with digital noise. This ancient philosophy has found a new kind of agora in the digital age. Stoicism is no longer confined to books or solitary reflection. It has exploded into a global network of practice through online forums and local meetups. People are not just reading about virtue and resilience, they are actively helping each other live it. On massive internet platforms, thousands gather daily to discuss a quote from Marcus Aurelius, to share a personal struggle through the lens of what is within their control, and to seek advice on applying ancient wisdom to modern problems like a stressful job or a difficult relationship. These digital spaces become a collective training ground, a virtual stoa poikile where anyone, anywhere, can find support and challenge their thinking. This global conversation then fuels a more intimate movement, the rise of local Stoic groups. In cities around the world, people leave their screens to sit in coffee shops or public libraries, meeting face to discuss a text, to practice philosophical exercises together, and to hold each other accountable. They form a microculture of mutual support, proving that the philosophy's deepest power is realized in community. When someone shares how they used a Stoic principle to navigate a personal crisis, the idea ceases to be abstract history and becomes a living tool. This modern revival demonstrates that Stoicism is not a relic, but a continuously evolving culture. It creates connection across continents and coffee tables, transforming individual pursuit into a shared journey toward a more resilient and examined life. Freedom from destructive passions was never about feeling nothing. That ancient Stoic goal, apatheia, is often mistaken for the cold emptiness of apathy, but its true meaning is far more powerful. It is the clarity that comes when the storm of reactive emotion finally settles, allowing you to see the world as it is, not as your fears or desires paint it. This profound principle of cognitive detachment did not vanish with the Roman Empire. It simply changed its name and costume, appearing again and again across the cultures that inherited the Stoic legacy. In the East, you can hear its echo in the serene acceptance of Zen Buddhism, where practitioners learn to observe their thoughts and feelings without being swept away by them. It is the same mental discipline, the same fundamental shift from being a prisoner of your internal weather to becoming a calm observer of the sky. Centuries later and an ocean away, modern mindfulness practices teach an almost identical skill. The instruction to notice your anger without judgment, to label a worried thought as just a thought, is a direct application of that old Stoic exercise. You are learning to insert a single, crucial moment of space between a trigger and your reaction, a space where choice and reason can live. This is not a coincidence. It points to a universal human need, a deep and shared understanding that our greatest suffering often comes not from the events of our lives, but from our tenacious grip on them. We cling to outcomes we cannot control, to opinions that harm us, and to a version of the past that we are powerless to change. The enduring power of this cross-cultural constant, from the meditating monk to the executive in a mindfulness seminar, reveals a simple truth. The art of letting go is not a surrender of power, but the ultimate claim of it, a quiet revolution that begins not in the world, but in the space between your ears. Through centuries of political collapse and cultural transformation, one radical idea remained unshaken. Virtue alone is the only true good. This was the bedrock of Stoic thought, a principle that survived the end of empires because it addressed a universal human confusion. Every culture, from ancient Rome to our own modern world, constantly sends a powerful message that happiness is found in external things. Wealth, social status, power, and comfort are presented as the ultimate prizes. The Stoics called these things preferred indifference. They are not evil, and it is natural to prefer health to sickness or prosperity to poverty, but they are fundamentally indifferent to a life well lived. They cannot be the source of your character or your lasting peace. This is why the four cardinal virtues were so paramount. Wisdom is not just knowledge, but the practical judgment to navigate life well. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the strength to do what is right despite it. Justice is the unwavering commitment to fairness in all your dealings with others. And temperance is the self-control to master your desires, not be mastered by them. These qualities reside entirely within your own will. No one can take them from you, and no circumstance can prevent you from cultivating them. A corrupt emperor might have all the gold in the world, but without justice, his soul is impoverished. An honest merchant who loses his ship in a storm still possesses his integrity. which is a wealth no storm can touch. This redefinition of success turns the conventional worldview upside down. It asks a profound question: if your happiness depends on things that can be lost, how can you ever be truly secure? By anchoring your worth in an internal moral compass, you build a foundation that no external event can destroy. This is the quiet revolution that traveled from Zeno's porch to our modern day, an invitation to stop chasing the wind and start building from within. A Roman senator felt his first loyalty was to Rome, a Greek philosopher to his city-state, and a tribal elder to his ancestral village. The Stoics dismantled these ancient walls with a single radical idea. We are all citizens of the world first. This concept of cosmopolitanism was not about travel or passports, but about a fundamental reordering of human identity. It asserted that your most important affiliation is not to your tribe or your nation, but to the entire human race, bound together by a shared capacity for reason. This was a direct challenge to the parochial loyalties that had defined societies for millennia. In the sprawling, multi-ethnic Roman Empire, this philosophy provided a crucial intellectual glue. It suggested that a Gaul, an Egyptian, and a Syrian were not merely subjects to be ruled, but fellow participants in a universal community. Their shared humanity, their common possession of the logos, made them morally significant to one another, regardless of the borders they lived within. This thinking began to soften the hard edges of imperial identity, suggesting that justice should not stop at the city gates. How could you claim a universal right to fair treatment for yourself while denying it to the foreign merchant in your port or the captive slave in your household? The Stoic vision of a global city of reason forced a slow, moral expansion of the circle of concern. This ancient seed would eventually bear fruit in the modern language of international law. The very idea that nations should be bound by common principles, that there are standards of conduct that transcend any single government's authority, is a direct descendant of the Stoic belief in a law higher than any human code. It is the philosophical ancestor of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which states that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. That powerful statement does not say all Romans or all Christians or all Europeans. It says all human beings, echoing the cosmopolitan ideal that first took root in an Athenian colonnade. This shift redefined a culture's place in the world from being a fortress to protect to being a single neighborhood in a vast, interconnected metropolis. This resilience was never meant to be a private possession. The Stoic ability to endure and grow from adversity became one of history's most powerful cultural exports, a virtue packaged and shipped along imperial trade routes and military roads. It transformed from a personal philosophy into a prized character trait for entire societies, shaping ideals of strength from the heat of the Arabian desert to the chill of the Antarctic ice. The Roman legionary, trained to see hardship as a test of character, was the original model. His discipline was not just for battle, it was a portable mindset that fortified outposts and colonies, creating a cultural standard for what it meant to be unbreakable. Centuries later, this same template was adopted and refined by another empire. The British explorer, facing a frozen wasteland or a treacherous jungle, did not see himself as a conqueror alone, but as a specimen of endurance. His journals, much like the Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, are filled with a calm acceptance of brutal conditions, a deliberate reframing of suffering as a necessary part of a greater mission. This was not merely physical toughness, it was a cognitive feat, a way of thinking that had been carefully cultivated. How does an idea become an identity? It happens when a system of thought provides such a practical advantage in managing chaos that it is woven into the very fabric of leadership and national myth. The stiff upper lip of the Victorian gentleman and the gritty determination of the American pioneer are both cultural descendants of the Stoic sage. They represent the widespread adoption of a mental operating system designed for instability. This exported resilience taught people to convert random misfortune into a narrative of purpose, to see themselves as active participants in a difficult trial rather than passive victims of circumstance. It built nations and sustained empires because it created individuals who could be relied upon not to collapse when the world around them did. The quiet practice of the inner citadel had become a loud and public virtue, a cultural force that crossed oceans and eras. Marcus Aurelius described the mind as an inner citadel, a fortress built not of stone but of reasoned judgment. This was not a metaphor for isolation but for ultimate security. Within its walls, your core self remains sovereign, untouched by the chaos of the outside world. The barbarians of misfortune, slander, or loss might camp at your gates, but they cannot breach your defenses unless you willingly lower the drawbridge and let them in. This powerful psychological model answered a timeless human fear, the terror of being at the mercy of events. It provided a blueprint for an architecture of the mind that was universally applicable because it addressed a universal need, the need for a sanctuary no external power could destroy. A Roman senator could find refuge there from political turmoil. A slave like Epictetus could find his freedom there, and today, anyone facing the relentless pressures of modern life can learn to build their own. The citadel's strength comes from a single, disciplined practice guarding the gate of your perceptions. Every external event, every piece of news, every word from another person must first be interpreted by you before it can affect you. The Stoic exercise is to meet each impression at the gate and ask, is this within my control? Is this truly good or evil, or have I merely judged it to be so? By refusing to assent to false or catastrophic judgments, you prevent the inner turmoil from ever beginning. This is why the concept traveled so well across cultures and centuries. It requires no specific god, no political system, and no material wealth. It only requires a mind willing to train itself. The inner citadel transforms you from a passive victim of circumstance into the active guardian of your own peace. A psychological shift as revolutionary now as it was 2,000 years ago. The word Stoic itself has become a quiet monument to this philosophy, embedded in our everyday language. We describe someone facing a crisis with Stoic calm, or enduring pain with Stoic resolve, often without knowing the ancient school from which the term sprang. This linguistic legacy is merely the surface of a much deeper influence, one that has profoundly shaped the very stories we tell about ourselves. For centuries, Western literature has turned to Stoic themes to explore the deepest questions of human endurance and moral choice. William Shakespeare populated his plays with characters wrestling with Stoic ideals. Consider the noble Brutus in Julius Caesar, a man tormented by the conflict between his affection for Caesar and his Stoic-inspired duty to the Republic. He strives to act with reason and justice, suppressing his personal emotions for what he perceives as the greater good, embodying the very tension between inner virtue and external action that defined Roman Stoicism. Even in his tragedies where passions run high, the framework of Stoic fortitude provides a counterpoint, a model of how one might bear the unbearable weight of fate. This literary conversation continued through the ages. In the 18th century, the novels of Jane Austen are filled with characters who prize self-command and rational judgment, the social equivalent of the Stoic inner citadel. Her heroines, like Elinor Dashwood in Sense and Sensibility, practice a quiet discipline over their feelings, navigating a world of limited options with dignity and principle. The Stoic emphasis on governing one's internal reactions proved to be a powerful engine for character development, creating a rich inner world for protagonists to inhabit. This tradition extends into modern fiction, where the archetype of the lone individual maintaining their integrity against an oppressive system is a direct descendant of the Stoic hero. The unbroken spirit of a prisoner in a gulag, or the quiet determination of a character facing social injustice, draws from the same well of ideas that comforted Epictetus. These stories resonate because they tap into a fundamental human yearning, the belief that our inner world is our own to command, that our character is the last great frontier of freedom. When a novelist places their character in an impossible situation, they are often asking a Stoic question, not how will this person escape their circumstances, but how will they choose to meet them. This literary adoption transformed Stoicism from a formal philosophy into a shared cultural language for understanding resilience, giving us narratives that continue to teach us what it means to be human in the face of adversity. From a single colonnade in Athens, this philosophy embarked on an unparalleled journey, weaving itself into the legal codes of Rome, the discipline of its legions, and the quiet resolve of an emperor. Stoicism was never a relic to be preserved under glass. It was a dynamic, living force, constantly reshaped by the empires that adopted it, and in turn, permanently reshaping their cultural landscapes. It provided the intellectual backbone for Roman law, introducing the revolutionary idea of universal human rights. It became the operating system for leaders from Seneca to Washington, teaching that to govern others, one must first govern the self. Its psychological insights, born in the slaves' quarters and the emperor's tent, now form the foundation of modern therapeutic practices, helping millions reclaim their inner world. And through it all, its core message of personal resilience has empowered individuals to build an unshakable inner citadel against the chaos of their times. Our own world, with its relentless pace and digital distractions, is perhaps the greatest test of this ancient wisdom. The Roman philosopher Seneca once wrote, "The greatest obstacle to living is expectancy, which hangs upon tomorrow and loses today." You are arranging the future that does not depend on you, and you are letting the present slip from your grasp. The future, in a sense, does belong to those who prepare for it today, not by anxiously trying to control the uncontrollable, but by mastering the one thing they truly can, their own mind and character. As you reflect on this journey across empires, which Stoic idea resonates most deeply with your own life? Is it the simple, liberating distinction between what is within your control and what is not, or the call to find strength in adversity and build your resilience from within? Let us know in the comments, and if you are ready to continue exploring how ancient ideas shape our modern world, subscribe for more journeys into the heart of philosophy.